Hey there, beauties and beasts. Welcome back to the show. Come on in, get comfy, grab a warm drink, and settle in because today I've got another mystery to share with you. And this one's a good one. So let's get cozy together and dig in. Okay. They say that in the northernmost part of the world, beyond the boundary of where the cold north wind starts to come howling in, there once existed a land that's unlike anywhere in the world today. It was a place where warm sunlight shone all year round, where flowers never wilted, and where people never got sick and never grew old, where they lived lives that came close to eternal. No war, no conflict, no poverty. A perfect paradise. The ancient Greeks called this land Hyperborea. And for a long time, people treated it as nothing more than an ideal that the ancients had dreamed up, just a myth. But then something strange started happening. People in different countries, in different eras, all started to discuss the possibility that maybe this land could be real. And many of them were looking toward the same idea. And finally, in the 20th century, one scholar chased that legend and set foot on the ground himself. So, what exactly did he find there? So today, let's follow the traces of that land sleeping beyond the north wind. Let's begin. The story goes back thousands of years to ancient Greece. Back then, Greece had a great poet named Pindar. He left behind countless odes to the victorious athletes of his time. And in his poems celebrating their great feats, one strange land kept showing up. A place no mere mortal could ever reach. A land of mystery that only those blessed by the gods could enter. The people there, it said, decorated their heads with golden laurel crowns and had days overflowing with joy. They didn't experience sickness or old age. And so, without conflict, without competition, they lived lives that came close to eternal, only leaving this paradise by choice. Pindar called this land Hyperborea. And there's something interesting buried in that name. In Greek mythology, the god who ruled the north wind was named Boreas, and Hyperborea meant the land that lies beyond that north wind. In other words, it was a name for the northernmost part of the world, a place past even the boundary where the cold wind blows. But Pindar wasn't the only one who spoke of this land. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, and Homer, revered as the founder of epic poetry, both of them put Hyperborea into their own writings. Their eras were different. Their reasons for writing were different. And yet, the Hyperborea they each described was strangely, remarkably alike. The northernmost point of the world, beyond a legendary mountain range, going purely by geography, it should have been a tundra, locked in cold all year. But the records say the exact opposite. Hyperborea, they claim, had land so fertile and a climate so mild that you could harvest crops there twice in a single year. The sun stayed up all but one day of the year, and the fields were so full of blooming flowers that it looked like a garden of the gods. The people of this blessed land were priests who served Apollo, the sun god. And the land was ruled by 3 of these priests who, according to legend, were giants standing over 3 meters tall. These giant priests built a round temple in the heart of the city and held grand ceremonies to praise Apollo. What's striking is that they never tried to keep their happiness to themselves. The people of Hyperborea were nothing but generous toward the outside world. They sent their priests out across the globe to guide people and to share precious gifts. And this is exactly where a dark shadow starts to fall over this peaceful story. These people, who lived knowing nothing but the purity of paradise, had no idea of the danger of the outside world. Disease, poverty, and conflict were unknown to them. It never even crossed their minds that someone might try to steal their precious treasures they were handing out, or try to harm them. And so the priests who went out into the world were killed off one by one, robbed and murdered by bandits along their pilgrimage routes or on their journey back home. Of all those who set out, not a single one ever made it back. Shaken to its core by this tragedy, Hyperborea finally made a difficult decision. It would firmly shut the door to the outside world and vanish entirely. And from that day on, the records about Hyperborea simply ended. Only one name survived, leaving a final trace of this dreamlike country. And that name is Abaris. He's said to be a man who left Hyperborea and then, because of a plague raging in the outside world at the time, could never make it back home. The stories surrounding him are anything but ordinary. Abaris, they say, crossed rivers and lakes and rugged mountains, places no person could easily get over, by flying through the sky on something shaped like an arrow. That flying object was called the Arrow of Apollo, and everywhere he went, he is said to have ended plagues and driven away disasters. A land of eternal spring ruled by the priests of a god, and a last survivor who traveled riding an arrow through the sky. Where the myth ends and the truth begins, that line is a blur. But there is one thing we know for certain. Many people, over many years, all showed an interest in this same land. As time passed, the idea of this mythical paradise started to raise a new question. If Hyperborea really existed, then where on Earth was it? So the first location to draw attention was the British Isles. Ancient Greek writers often pointed to Hyperborea as the land of the northern Celts, and it was Abaris' story, of all things, that gave this theory its weight. There was a record claiming that the figure who flew around on an arrow healing the sick had come from the Druids, the mysterious priestly order of ancient Ireland. If he really had been a druid, then the legend of him performing mystical medicine would make sense. The next place on the list was a little further north, in Scandinavia. And there is a good reason for it. In the northern half of the Scandinavian peninsula, when high summer comes, the sun never sets, even at night. The concept of the midnight sun overlaps strangely well with that description of Hyperborea, where the sun stayed up almost every day of the year. So the peninsula was sometimes called the lost land of Hyperborea. As the years went on, the hunt for the location started moving more and more into the realm of science. In the mid-20th century, one British scientist published an interesting paper. His hypothesis was that when the Earth first cooled, the polar regions cooled before the equator did. If that were true, then the polar regions might once have had a mild, comfortable climate, and countless primitive tribes would have settled there. Then, when the Ice Age ended and the sea levels rose, that land sank beneath the ocean, and those who escaped went on to build a vast culture. Adding another theory that the hymns of the oldest scriptures may have been written within the Arctic Circle. And this idea picked up a fair amount of weight. Now, Scandinavia and the British Isles are geographically not too far apart, But the candidate most strongly cited today is, surprisingly, somewhere else entirely. The vast stretch of territory running from China up to Siberia. This theory has a surprisingly tight set of supporting clues, and the thread began with a single ancient poem. A passage about the hero Heracles chasing a golden deer until he arrived at a legendary country beyond the north wind. And here, the deer he was chasing leaves behind a curious clue. Normally, only male deer grow antlers, but there is exactly one kind where the females grow them too: the reindeer. And the reindeer is, of all things, an animal of the Arctic. From this, people supposed that Hyperborea could be somewhere beyond Siberia. There was a clue hidden in the name too. The records describing Hyperborea always feature a word meaning north wind, and some scholars took this to mean the fierce winter wind that sweeps across Siberia and Kazakhstan. In fact, this region sat right along the path of Silk Road, the great trade route linking Europe and Asia. At the time, China was an incredibly wealthy nation, enjoying a golden age of culture that outshone that of Europe. The European imagination of a warm, abundant paradise lying beyond a cold trade route may have been considering this rich eastern nation. And there is another, stranger aspect of Hyperborea that can be traced back to this region. You see, the records feature stories of a one-eyed race called the Arimaspi. A warm, abundant land is one thing, but one-eyed people are more difficult to believe in. However, some linguists argue that this could actually be an issue of translation. The one-eyed reading comes from the Greek itself. Ancient writers parsed Arimaspi as Scythian arima, one, and spau, eye. But it is argued, if you consider the old Iranian word for horse, aspa, it could actually mean something closer to horse owners, or those with wild or many horses. So some linguists took the mention of this one-eyed race to actually refer to horse-riding people who dominated the northern steppes at the time. There are also stories of the gold-guarding monster known as the griffin. And the debate surrounding this is even more interesting. In the gold mines of this area, it is said that fossils of dinosaurs were often found alongside the gold. That the look of some of the skulls, with the heads separated off on their own, resemble the corpses of winged monsters. And so, the legend of a monster guarding gold may well have grown out of the fossils lying near the gold mines. And so the speculation about Hyperborea's location went on endlessly, but none of it ever became a definite answer. They were all theories and nothing more. Nobody had ever laid eyes on that land with their own two eyes. Then, one day, a single scholar left all the speculation behind and headed straight for the land himself. In 1922, when every theory was still just a hypothesis committed to paper, there was a man in Russia, a biologist, occultist, and explorer named Alexander Barchenko, who was determined to find the truth. He was convinced that before the humankind of today, there had existed another civilization we know nothing about. And he believed that to uncover our true origin, you had to find the traces of that ultra-ancient civilization scattered throughout old texts, Hyperborea. As he dug through countless records, he noticed that one particular description kept stubbornly repeating. Hyperborea was close to the polar regions, and yet, strangely enough, a warm land, a mild country that lay beyond the northern boundary where the permanent snow begins. A lowland at the far north where the sun never sets, a vast island you had to cross a frozen sea to reach. Records from different eras and different sources all painted the same picture. Barchenko decided this wasn't just mythical embellishment. He saw it as people of the past describing, each in their own way, a real and enormous land that had actually existed somewhere in the Arctic. He soon began narrowing it down, region by region. A location within the Arctic, and yet strangely mild. A place that might once have looked like an island. There was only one location that satisfied all these tricky conditions at the same time. The Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia. This peninsula is almost entirely positioned within the Arctic Circle, and yet the weather is unusually mild compared to those surrounding it. It's a strange region there, despite its location. The sea doesn't freeze thanks to a warm ocean current flowing in. And on top of that, even the old record's description of a place that looked like an island matched the peninsula's terrain exactly. Convinced, Barchenko put together a small expedition that year and set off for the Kola Peninsula. The field was far more daunting than he'd imagined. The expedition had no choice but to cover the vast peninsula on foot, searching that huge expanse of land one section at a time. Then, before long, something strange happened. Most of the expedition members started suffering from severe headaches and dizziness. The symptoms came and went without any clear cause, and at times the pain was bad enough to make exploring impossible. What was even more unsettling was that the people who were native to the region had also been going through the very same thing. They gave the expedition a warning. There's a place on that mountain you must never disturb. There's a passage leading to a certain special temple, and the closer you get to it, the worse the pain becomes. The moment Barchenko heard that, he knew that right there was the trace of Hyperborea, the place he'd been searching for this whole time. The group moved immediately to the area the locals had pointed out and began climbing the mountain in question. The whole way up, the mountain appeared to be largely ordinary. And what's worse is that the higher they climbed, the more severe the mysterious headaches became. Some of the members were on the verge of giving up. But just then, Barchenko felt a strange sense that something was wrong, off somehow. The slope of the mountain was somehow unnatural. For a terrain that was supposed to have been shaped by nature, the structure and the angles appeared to be far too uniform. He went straight back down the mountain and looked up at it again from a distance. At the moment the whole outline of the mountain came into view all at once, he finally started seeing what he hadn't been able to see before. It was, by anyone's eye, the shape of an enormous pyramid, the four faces dripping at a consistent angle, the structure running down layer by layer like a staircase. It wasn't a natural mountain. It was clearly an artificial structure that someone had put together. Barchenko headed straight back up the mountain. If it really was a pyramid, he figured, there had to be an entrance somewhere. And after a relentless search, he finally found it near the summit. The narrow passage the locals had spoken of. But the real problem came next. One member of the group, just as he was about to step into the entrance, suddenly grabbed his head, screamed, and immediately collapsed. Every member watching froze where they stood. Barchenko had no choice but to conclude that getting any closer to this place would be impossible. And so the expedition was cut short, right there and then. Despite having the entrance right in front of them, they were unable to take even a single step inside. And a short while later, Barchenko was swept up in Stalin's Great Purge. By then, he'd been pulled deep into the Soviet secret police's own occult research. And when the terror tore through those ranks, he didn't survive it. He was arrested, accused of running a secret mystical brotherhood and spying for a foreign power, and was executed by firing squad in 1938. Once he was gone, the existence of that pyramid sleeping the frozen land seemed to slowly fade from people's memories. But the story didn't end there. A long time passed after Barchenko's untimely death, but the records he left behind, fragmentary as they weren't something you could just quietly bury. His claim that there might be an enormous artificial pyramid in the Arctic Circle remained a question that would, someday, absolutely have to be checked again. And finally, later scholars picked that question back up. As technology advanced, voices rose in academic circles, saying it was time to properly dig into the mystery of that mountain. And so, a newly assembled expedition, with Barchenko's records in hand, headed back to the Kola Peninsula. On this expedition, they discovered strange markings carved all over the mountain. The engraved patterns found on the ground had lines and shapes so distinct that it was hard to see them as creations of nature. And what was more astonishing was that these markings weren't on just one mountain. The same patterns were carved on an enormous scale all over the area around the mountain, too. What made it so strange was the scale. The markings were so vast that down at ground level, you'd never know you were standing on them, which is exactly why Barchenko, climbing on foot, had walked right past them. Only from a distance did the patterns finally resolve into something deliberate. And yet, the single most important thing still went unsolved. There was, even then, no way to look directly inside the pyramid. Just as Barchenko had, the later expedition could only circle the outside of that massive structure. Then the exploration hit another turning point. This time, the approach itself was different. Instead of risking it and going into the mountain, they decided to first examine what was under it. The expedition brought in cutting-edge equipment that could scan the underground structure clearly, a device that fired radio waves into the ground and analyzed the returning signals to figure out what was buried below. And here, they discovered something no one had expected. Deep inside the mountain, they detected an enormous empty space that you could not consider to be natural terrain. It was an underground cavity, as if someone had deliberately dug it out. And what was even more chilling were the complex lines stretching out in every direction from that space. It looked like a huge network of underground passages, tangled beneath the mountain like a spider's web. Beneath the very mountain where Barchenko was forced to call off his search, there really was something hidden. Now, you might be thinking, then why not just go in and check? But somehow, even to this day, not one single thing about the true nature of this pyramid's interior has been clearly explained. The existence of the enormous underground space has been confirmed, but what exists inside, it is still unknown. When the answers refused to come, the mystery spread into bolder and bolder speculation. Some people started linking the Kola Peninsula pyramid to the hollow earth theory. The idea that the inside of the planet is empty and that another world exists within it. According to their claims, the Earth's north and south poles have a few secret entrances leading to that underground world, and this Kola Peninsula pyramid is one of them. That unexplained pain that struck Barchenko's man down, they suggest, may have been a kind of barrier set up to keep humans from carelessly drawing near. Of course, all of this could just be a fantasy spun by the human imagination. The unnatural slope, the headaches on the mountain. Maybe a day will come when they're explained by some natural phenomenon we just don't understand yet. But one clear fact is still sitting right in front of us. A land almost entirely located in the Arctic, yet strangely warm, terrain that once looked like an island, and an enormous artificial structure resting inside it. A land of eternal spring ruled by the priests of a god, and a scholar who chased its traces only to have to stop at the entrance. Maybe Hyperborea really is nothing more than a beautiful fantasy of the ancients. But what if maybe every one of those records are true? The ones who turn their backs on the outside world and lock the door themselves. Could it be that even at this very moment, beyond the frozen land, they're still guarding a paradise of their own that we know nothing about, living in near eternal happiness? The truth is still sealed away, deep in the ground. Was it really another civilization that existed before humanity? Or just the dream of a lost paradise that we're doomed to forever long for? That judgment I will leave to you. Okay, that's a wrap for today. Good night, guys, and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.